If you and I were sitting down together as fellow history buffs, I'd start by telling you this. Before we get into these overlooked heating systems, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these deep dive survival topics. Because what we're about to cover isn't the recycled surface level history you hear everywhere. This is the kind of knowledge that gets passed around among serious researchers, the sort of practical wartime engineering that kept ordinary families alive when industry collapsed, fuel vanished, and winter didn't care who was fighting whom. During the Second World War, people on every front, occupied villages, bombed-out cities, frontline camps and countryside hideouts, didn't have the luxury of modern heating. They had to rebuild, improvise and reinvent warmth with materials they could scavenge. And they built systems so clever, so resilient, that many preppers today still don't know they existed. This guide breaks down 8 of these forgotten systems, not as romantic stories, but as practical tools you can adapt. You know, it's fascinating how families brought back the old trench stove concept and, well, found ways to adapt it for both indoor and outdoor use. Long before it was just considered a relic of the First World War, the trench stove, often made from metal tins, bricks, or even leftover sheet iron, actually made a return during the Second World War as a trusty makeshift heater. When cities were bombed and homes lost their chimneys or safe fireplaces, families turned to versions of the trench stove to get by. The principle behind it was really quite simple. A controlled burn inside a narrow horizontal chamber that concentrated heat, pushed smoke out through a crude flue, and, well, made small amounts of wood or coal last a lot longer than any open fire could. If you wanted to give it a go today, you could build one using a steel ammo box or even some welded sheet metal. The real trick is having a narrow burn tunnel with a small air intake and a safe directed exhaust pipe. Back in the war, many families cooked on the very same device, making it both a heater and a survival stove, all in one. If you're restoring one for off-grid use, you'll want to line the interior with fire brick, right? That helps to keep the heat focused and, well, it really does improve burn efficiency. So, you know, stone and clay mass heaters were actually rebuilt from centuries-old designs when fuel became scarce. When fuel shortages hit Europe, loads of rural families, they rebuilt those traditional clay and stone mass heaters that had been used for generations before industrial coal heating took over. These massive structures, they absorbed heat slowly and, well, radiated it for hours, even after the fire died down. The wartime versions, honestly, were a bit cruder, often rebuilt from rubble stone, broken brick, and clay dug straight from gardens or riverbanks. But the principle held true. Burning a small, hot fire inside a thick masonry shell creates long-lasting, radiant heat. Even today, if you're building a cabin heater on a tight budget, you can replicate the wartime designs by constructing a small brick firebox and surrounding it with a thick outer layer of stone or cob. These heaters shine especially in long winter climates where slow, steady heat preserves fuel and keeps conditions stable. How families engineered homemade rocket-style stoves decades before the modern survival movement rediscovered them. Rocket stoves, in their basic form, are nothing new. During the Second World War, particularly in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, families used L-shaped clay or metal tubes that created strong draft airflow, allowing small sticks and twigs to burn with impressive efficiency. They weren't called rocket stoves back then. They were simply fast-burning, fuel-stretching heaters. The vertical chimney heated living areas, while the horizontal feed tube allowed constant burning without opening a full firebox. If you want to build one today, the wartime method is still the best starting point. You form the L shape using stovepipe or fire brick, insulate the surrounding chamber with ash or clay, and, well, extend the chimney through a safe outlet. This type of heater is excellent for emergency cabins because it uses minimal fuel, exactly as wartime families needed. Now, here's how people turned old oil and fuel cans into drip-fed heaters that produce steady heat for hours. Whenever abandoned fuel depots, garages or army scrapyards were accessible, civilians salvaged metal cans and converted them into drip-fed oil heaters. These devices worked by releasing a controlled trickle of used engine oil, kerosene, or even animal fat onto a superheated metal plate. The plate vaporized the liquid, producing a predictable flame with, honestly, surprisingly high heat output. So, to replicate this today, you'd need a thick steel plate, a small valve to regulate the drip, and a stable base that prevents tipping. Wartime versions were rough, but they served families who had access to oil, but lacked wood. The biggest lesson here is that controlled fuel delivery is what makes these heaters safe and effective, not the fuel type itself. How sawdust burners provided long, slow heat using scraps no one else wanted. Sawdust heaters became widespread in areas with woodworking shops or bombed factories. A simple upright metal cylinder was packed tightly with sawdust around a central dowel. Removing the dowel after packing created a narrow chimney that allowed slow combustion from top to bottom. One tightly packed burn could last 8 to 10 hours, which made these heaters perfect for shelter basements and small apartments. If you want to test this system yourself, fill a metal bucket with sawdust pressed down firmly around a wooden rod, remove the rod, and ignite the top. The tighter the pack, the slower the burn. Exactly what families relied on when wood shortages became severe. How earth-insulated fire pits heated makeshift bunkers and underground shelters. In occupied territories and partisan hideouts, underground shelters used earth-insulated heating pits that kept heat in while hiding smoke signatures. Heat travelled through a buried channel, warming the shelter without bringing flame inside. The channel length was essential because by the time smoke reached the exit, it dispersed as a faint, cool plume. Today, if you're building a survival shelter or studying historical methods, you can recreate this by digging a fire pit several feet away from the main shelter and running a vent through packed soil or clay. This system teaches an essential wartime principle. Separating flame from living space reduces risk and increases stealth. So, let's talk about how folks built hot water circulation systems from scrap pipes in destroyed apartment buildings. In cities that had been flattened, like Warsaw, Hamburg and Stalingrad, residents actually went around scavenging torn-out plumbing and old radiators just to rebuild these small hot water systems. What they did, usually, was set up a stove or a firebox to heat water in a metal tank, and then let natural convection push the warm water through pipes into nearby rooms. It was, honestly, a bit of genius born from necessity. Now, these systems weren't exactly elegant, but they turned a single fire into whole apartment heat. And, you know, if you're restoring an off-grid homestead today, this method still works. All you need is a metal water tank beside a wood stove and run pipes upward and outward. Gravity will do the job and circulate the water automatically. Wartime survivors used this trick to turn limited fuel into maximum heat spread. How heated stone beds kept families warm through the night with no fuel burning indoors. One of the oldest methods revived during the Second World War involved heating dense stones in an outdoor fire, then placing them in metal boxes or wrapping them in cloth to serve as radiant heat sources indoors. These stones radiated warmth slowly, reducing nighttime fire risks. This was especially common in areas where children or elders needed steady heat, but fuel had to be preserved. If you're studying or practicing this technique, use only dense, dry stones that won't crack from heat. Heated stone mass is one of the safest ways to keep a small space warm without burning fuel inside. These 8 systems remind us how much skill and resilience wartime families possessed. If you found this guide valuable, make sure you subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who appreciates real survival history.